Greetings to all C3RF members and friends across Canada and indeed around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom on their dedicated streaming channels as I view this video summary of the C3RF update for 9 May 2025. The title of this update is Freedom for Security, and it begins by noting that when one looks at the Canadian judicial system these days, the term helter-skelter could easily come to mind. There is hardly a day goes by that the everyday citizen doesn't see the confusion and disorder, with many decisions of the court appearing to be contradictory and haphazard. At the heart of all the confusion is a charter that once stood as a point of pride for Canadians and spoke to values that all citizens could claim common cause with. As late as 2015, this rosy outlook on the charter would see as many as 4 out of 5 Canadians lauding the Supreme Law as good for Canada. Additionally, this goodwill would extend to the courts, including the Supreme Court, with majorities of Canadians expressing a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in both courts, the Supreme Court included. A remarkable level of satisfaction given the fact that no other institution surveyed had the confidence of more than a third of Canadians. The Charter was more popular even than hockey. Could things have changed that much over 10 short years? The widespread appreciation for Canada's Charter can be seen to be centered on its stated aim to protect the rights of the individual from government overreach. This makes sense given the document's stress on fundamental rights that home in on a citizen's capacity to speak, think, worship, live, and associate in accordance with his or her own preferences. This may explain why these same Canadians believe their personal rights parallel those found within the United States Constitution and include a right to the pursuit of happiness. This understanding of the precedence of individual freedoms over and above other collective rights, like those found within Section 15 of the Charter, is fully supported by the Charter's own preamble. This portion of the Supreme Law lays down the guide rails for the rest of the Charter and notes that they are founded upon the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. How could the rank-and-file citizen, given this preamble and the precedents afforded fundamental individual rights, not believe that the Charter was intended to unify all Canadian hearts under the banner of personal freedom? Everyday citizens are not alone in believing that their own individual freedom, rather than diversity or multiculturalism, is the strength that unites the land. The last living First Minister responsible for patriating the Constitution to Canada, the Honourable Brian Peckford, is of a similar mind. He is on record as stating in no uncertain terms that the original intent of the Charter's framers was to offer up Section 1 limitations to the fundamental rights of citizens only in the event of great urgency, like times of war, insurrection, or perils to the state. Between this understanding, held by good people of Canada in common with a last living framer, is it any wonder citizens look askance at helter-skelter courts that seem to make it up as they go along? And how telling is it that no one in authority, from courts to political halls of power, see any need to consult with the likes of a Peckford on such foundational considerations? The fact that the Canadian courts would be quick off the mark when it came to dispatching with any need to live and rule by the original intent of the Charter was made clear by Justices Larmer and Wilson in 1985 when they wrote that the Charter was open to the, quote, purposive approach to constitutional interpretation consistent with the living tree doctrine which sees the Constitution as capable of growth and expansion within its natural limits, unquote. And so it was without little debate or consideration thereafter, as Canadian courts would align with the progressive arguments of Woodrow Wilson. This American president in the early 20th century would state that the U.S. Constitution needed to be interpreted, quote, according to the Darwinian principle, unquote, since he considered the nation to be a living thing and not a machine. His theory would view the law as a living tree that needs to be updated regularly in accordance with the moods of the time. Of course, the need to engineer the law on the basis of evolving social mores would prove irresistible to Canadian jurists recently liberated by a new 1982 Charter. Gone were the common law strictures of precedent and tradition when it came to matters of state action that now fell under the purview of Charter law. The courts were now cleared to step out ahead of traditional community standards to address the social pieties of the day. Indeed, Justice Rosalia Bella would note that the Supreme Justices had become, quote, the final adjudicator of which contested values in a society should triumph, unquote. The need to enable society's new norms would prove a challenge, however, that would require the Charter's guiding principles and commitment to fundamental rights to be tamped down in a bid to better balance them off against other rights. It would be a brave new world in Canada as things like freedom of speech, religion, and conscience would give way to rights to abortion, euthanasia, and human sexuality. As if this were not enough, the fundamentals and even the rule of law would need to make way for emergencies, be they declared domestically or by offshore authorities. These instances piled up in a daily fashion during the course of the Wuhan virus crisis and are now with us as we elbows up to do battle with Orange Man Bad on the tariff front. In the case of the virus, regular Canadian folk were asked to give up their bodily autonomy in the name of mandated experimental vaccines. Those that demurred were pilloried by their own leaders in no uncertain terms as, quote, these people, unquote. In the case of the tariff battle, citizens would be removed from any ability to exercise their right to participate fully in the election 2025 process by having their information sources hijacked by cynical political ploys to keep their eyes on Orange Man Bad and off of an unknown and untested political candidate. The displacement of Canadian fundamental liberties by other priorities can be likened to a steam engine of old straining to break free from a standing start. All available torque created by its mighty engine is spent on overcoming the anchor of inertia on the way to building speed. It takes some time, but the acceleration takes hold and the behemoth is eventually hurtling down the tracks with an inertia all of its own. And so it is in the early post-charter days when judges began to test their limits of their own activist leanings. It really wasn't a surprise to those in the know, including the Charter's framers, as they saw the possibility looming as they deliberated the supreme law. The premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular would demand that such a situation be addressed, and a compromise in the form of a notwithstanding clause would become a safety valve against such activism. The departure of the unfreedom train from the station in 1982 would open the door for successive waves of special interest groups to tug on the heartstrings of Canadian judges. These victims of an oppressive mainstream culture would leverage new multiculturalism laws and the popular admonition that the state had no business in the bedrooms of the nation to motivate the judiciary to read in new equality rights into Section 15 of the Charter. These additions, including the sanctioning of gender identity and expression and the related outlawing of conversion therapy, could be seen as an end run around principles laid down in the Charter's own preamble and an amending law meant to bring public opinion to bear given such major changes to the Constitution. How else to explain a conversion therapy law that criminalizes efforts to guide a person from unwanted non-traditional sexual orientations to the traditional, even as it okay transitions the other way around? Rule of law, be damned. The compassion argument would prove successful in diminishing the intended individual rights of Canadians, and Section 1 of the Charter would aid in the effort. This limitations clause would allow courts to exercise their own subjective judgment to determine what was reasonable when it came to quashing rights in a free and democratic society. Compassion would become coercion, however, and any Section 1 analysis would be dispensed with completely with the advent of the Wuhan virus crisis. It mattered not that early on the virus is known to be less fatal than a 4-mile car commute for the under 65 or negligible for children. Fear-mongering would ensure the working population and school children stayed home with their civil liberties trashed. Fear-mongering is now fully entrenched in Canada's political landscape, as elected representatives are quite content to stand by and leave their electorate high and dry in the face of pumped-up threats emanating from Orange Man Bad. There will be no debate on what went wrong during the pandemic or the last 10 years of liberal policies. After all, fundamental rights and economic prospects are the price that must be paid for security in the face of never-ending fear. In closing, a reminder to join us at CanadianCitizens.org, where you can see this update in its full glory, including all of the links to all of the cited documents. Simply go to the News tab at the top of the page and select C3RF member updates from its drop-down menu. Until next time, this is Russ Cooper signing off, wishing you and yours much happiness and freedom from C3RF.